So the Vernee Mars actually comes in at just under $200, which doesn't sound particularly cheap, but considering the market the phone is pitched against, I think it's an absolute steal. The body is crafted almost entirely out of one single piece of aircraft grade aluminium alloy, meaning it's not only light, but also highly durable. Something which was interesting is considering the high screen to body ratio and also the fact that it's got some nice curves on it, the phone was surprisingly usable even with one hand. It's a little bit slippy to touch, which is a big shame because although it is structurally very strong, the casing does scratch quite easily. Having said that, I think the device looks awesome, even if it has borrowed a tip or two from Apple. On top of that, it's only 7.6mm thin, meaning that it's pretty easy to fit into a bag or a pocket. Something I found really weird but actually quite useful is that they built in a fingerprint scanner onto the side of the phone. Seems bizarre, but it works really well, it's comfortable and it's fast. So then we've got the display, and on offer here is a 5.5-inch 1080p experience. Nothing outstanding, but also nothing disappointing. The contrast, colours and saturation are really well balanced. They're slightly on the high side, but at the same time they're not overdone and they make videos and games look really good. On top of that, the display is bright enough to be viewed in almost all conditions, and at just over 178 degrees the viewing angles are top notch. And then we've got that bezel, and at just 0.1mm thin, it really increases the immersiveness of the display, and it looks awesome too. In terms of the software, we've got Android 6.0 in its almost purest form. It looks and feels great on the phone, there's basically no bloatware, but for some strange reason the company's decided to stick older versions of Android icons on this one's home screen. And this brings us on to what's really under the hood, and it's impressive because we've got the Helio P10 octa-core processor and 4GB of RAM. Now, all I can say is that it flies through pretty much any task you'll throw at it. Whether or not that 4GB is being used to its fullest is more up for debate. Every time I checked it, it almost had a gig and a half spare. Running through Antutu benchmark, we're getting 50,000, which is not quite as high as phones like the Redmi Note 4, which is pitched at a similar price, but then again this phone has other benefits. Gaming in terms of 3D and 2D was fine. I didn't have any problems. I played Modern Combat 5. I even tried Suicide Squad, which is very demanding in itself, and all these games seem to work perfectly, and they look fantastic too. Having said that, it's worth bearing in mind that I just had a couple of application issues. There's 2 or 3 apps and games here or there that just didn't quite work as they were meant to, even though they have done on similarly spec'd devices. On paper, the camera doesn't really stand out at all. It's got a 13-megapixel sensor with phase detection autofocus, but when I actually used it, I was really chuffed. Not only does it capture really good detail in both low and high lighting conditions, but it copes with HDR scenarios quite well, so when you've got a lot of light and a lot of dark, it seems to balance the exposure as well as you'd probably expect it to. In terms of colour, the photos come out a tad washed out, but it makes up for it with its really fast shutter time. In fact, so fast that it's almost on par with my Galaxy S7. This camera has the ability to produce some really clean photos, and with an f2.0 aperture, you can get some decent bokeh effects as well if you plan it right, and the front camera isn't half bad either. At 3000 mAh, the battery doesn't sound like anything fantastic, and in terms of screen on time, it's pretty much what you'd expect. You get about 5 hours, but in terms of standby, it's just awesome. In fact, after initially testing this, I kinda left the phone on the side for about a week, picked it up later, and it still worked. The speaker is pretty interesting too, because whilst it does lack a little bit in the bass department, it produces a strangely crisp sound experience and reaches a pretty decent volume too. So whilst it's not great for music and perhaps movie watching, I found it really nice for gaming. You'll be glad to know that it's also got a notification LED, support for 4G and a minimum of 32GB of internal storage, and with room to expand up to another 128. So guys, there we go, that is the Vernee Mars, and as I said earlier, it's a really interesting phone. At $200, it's not the fastest you can get. In fact, in terms of a raw benchmark between this and the Redmi Note 4, this would get absolutely obliterated. Having said that, it's more than fast enough to do just about anything you want to do on your Android phone, and it offers some really unique features in its own right. The side-mounted fingerprint scanner, the really impressive camera, as well as the high screen-to-body ratio make this a compelling offer in its own right. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.